So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. So, with me today, I've got a slightly different topic to normal. We're talking all about the world of recruitment, jobs, and careers. So, slight difference, and I thought I'd actually get someone on that is doing the doing and talking the talk. So, with me today is Jamie Irwin, who is a partner and head of the UK CFO practice at Finatal. So, thanks very much, Jamie, for joining me on the show today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Fabulous. So, just for those individuals that may not have heard about Finatel, just tell us a little bit about your role in the organisation.
Yeah, sure. So Finatal, we're a leading search partner for the private capital sphere. So we're focused on building successful, talented teams for both private equity funds as well as their portfolio businesses. So we partner with companies that are private equity backed throughout sort of all stages of the investment cycle in the UK, across Europe and North America as well. And then my role here is a partner, and I head up our UK CFO practice. So we're placing sort of CFOs into venture capital and private equity-backed businesses on a permanent basis. And then I do have colleagues who do the same as on an interim capacity as well.
So, with private equity, how much of the hiring is driven by the equity house or the investment house versus like the actual business that you're going to be working within?
So it's really case by case and can depend on sort of the type of private equity deal. So naturally, if sort of it's a majority buyout, the private equity house will have much more control and will sort of tend to drive that decision themselves, and they'll want their own CFO that they've hired and brought in to support on that sort of investment cycle. If it's a minority deal, it's a slightly more sort of softer approach from my experience. Private equity will sort of guide and influence and sort of say that you might look to make this type of hire. It's worked well for us previously, but obviously if they don't have a controlling seat at board level then they are more suggesting rather than able to really drive and make that change themselves.
And we talk about obviously whether it's a majority or minority share. Like which are the individuals within that private equity house that are actually influencing or having a say in the decision?
So it really sort of depends, again, depending on the size of the funds and their own internal setup. So sort of from a small cap fund, it's normally the deal partner who would sort of drive that decision. They will have met with the CEOs, management teams throughout the due diligence process pre-deal and actually sort of scoped out the quality of said CFO in post, or there might not actually be that person from a earlier stage company. But what we're seeing more increasingly from sort of mid-market and large cap funds in the UK as well as internationally is that they themselves are building out their own portfolio ops teams or value creation. So actually you might have someone who is just an out and out deals person who leads the transaction and then hands over to an internal colleague who is better sort of focused around working with that business day to day on the value creation, helping them strategically and growing. And they will be sort of more hands on in driving that sort of hiring process themselves.
And that's in terms of obviously private equity versus other businesses. How does the requirements and what the PE firm is actually looking for differ in those kind of organisations?
Yeah, so private equity's got the sort of reputation of being quite a closed shop, and we're often sort of engaging with CFOs or step up candidates, so those who are sort of heads of FP&A or FDs looking to make that move into PE who don't have the prior PE experience. So it's quite a common question, Hannah. Typically, they're looking for people who are able to match their pace. The private equity sphere is cyclical by nature, so your average hold time is sort of between 3 and 5 years. So if you think about it, most of the sort of CFOs have a 3 to 5 year window to sort of come in and really positively impact the business, grow it, expand it internationally, support organic as well as M&A sort of revenue growth. And then the ultimate goal is to successfully sell that business. So you don't have a sort of soft landing spot of 12 months to really bed in. You need to hit the ground running from day one. So they tend to like people who can sort of match that pace. I think another sort of characteristic is really around that ability to roll sleeves up and drive change themselves. Private equity don't tend to like CFOs who are too, what I say, ivory tower and want to come in and have sort of a 50-person finance team below them. They need to sort of be do as I do as well as sort of do as I say. So it's really important they can sort of build that, be hands-on, drive operational improvements themselves. Another key theme that we see is probably around the sort of cash management. Cash is king, obviously. So having really good sort of detailed cash flow forecasting capabilities, and able to really sort of manage treasury, covenants, banking relationships directly themselves. And that's sometimes typically where people can sort of fall down is not having that stakeholder or relationship management directly. And private equity want people who are experienced in that debt leveraged sort of environment, because that is typically how they will fund and set up a deal. So it's a slightly different sort of mentality to a PLC, where you might have a 10-man group treasury function and just have to pull down cash and draw down from a sort of corporate owner. And like I say, coming back to that theme around sort of M&A as well. So acquisitions are often a key part of sort of a private equity strategy. So having someone who can sort of drive and have that corporate finance skill set alongside the operational day-to-day running of a business is often a desirable trait for sort of private equity CFOs to have.
And when you're getting people into private equity, are they often coming from sort of an FD background and then stepping up to CFO at a private equity, or are you seeing more transitions from non-private equity backgrounds and then shifting across into a private equity piece? Like, is there a preference or a pattern that you've seen as to where new private equity CFOs are coming from?
So I'd say that roughly 80% of the mandates that we work on, the investor's preference would be to hire someone already at CFO level who's got prior experience working for a PE-backed business, and ideally who's probably led an exit as well. The rationale behind that is that they're tried and tested, and in so theory that should be less of a risky hire for the investor. But obviously goes without saying that there isn't an infinite pool of private CFOs on the market. Most of them are already in jobs and locked in. And sort of going back to sort of last year as well, we saw the lowest number of private equity exits for about a decade. So actually also there are sort of less of these experienced CFOs coming to market than perhaps there would have been off the back of sort of successfully exiting a business and leading a buyout. So consequently, sort of private equity houses are increasingly having to look at different talent pools to satisfy the demand that they do have for CFOs. So the other talent pool that we are seeing more increasingly sort of tapped into as well is seeing CFOs transition from AIM listed businesses to private equity backed. So the companies might be more similar in terms of sort of size and scale to that of a lower mid market or mid market private equity backed. Again, they might utilize their sort of sector experience and sort of business understanding and leverage that to make the move. Those roles as CFOs of AIM listed will also have investor reporting requirements and be investor facing. Perhaps those coming from a main market FTSE listed company where there is the sort of bureaucracy and red tape and sort of different pace in some occasions that we spoke about earlier. So they're increasingly the two key pools that we're looking into to widen the number of candidates that could fit the sort of searches that we're mandated on.
And where do you see people falling down? Like great candidates you've had initial call with, but when you put them in front of the PE house and the individuals there, like things just haven't quite worked. What are the most common themes that you see there?
I think it most commonly is that gravitas and experience of presenting to boards and being questioned directly and sometimes quite intensively by a panel of investors or CEOs, etc. So often, like I say, again, coming back to what good looks like from a private equity CFO, is that ability to influence stakeholders, hold gravitas around the board table and drive change. So if you haven't had that experience, it's obviously difficult to get it. And some people do fall down from that piece, presentation skills wise, and the ability to be able to story tell in essence and bring people on the journey. And similarly, when we've analysed sort of high performing CFOs and traits for etc. We did some work with Thomas International from a PPA psychometric profiling perspective, and the high performing sort of PE CFOs slightly over index the market in terms of that dominance piece. So that's in a positive way, and that there are instances where people are too over dominant and overbearing, and that can conflict with management teams and investors. But you need to be able to be confident in proactively challenging those around the board table, but in a positive light. And I think, like I say, that can be where people fall down if they don't have the experience or confidence of doing that.
And that's an interesting. Was there any other insights into personality traits or other aspects of CFOs that came out of that study?
Yeah, so steadiness was quite a key one, which was really interesting. So steadiness and resilience sort of linked quite well, and have often been sort of key themes of what we've seen. So going back to obviously sort of COVID times, global pandemic, still can remember clear as day one investor that we know saying that their CFO had been caught like a rabbit in the headlights. And look, no one could have sort of sat around the table and sort of foreseen a global pandemic, but actually it was that reaction of what do we do next. So actually sort of contingency planning, coming back to, like I say, cash forecasting, etc. Those are sort of key things around that sort of time, and the ability to maintain control and sort of stick to your guns around processes of sort of how do we take the business forward, or actually, like I say, thinking outside the box in terms of how do we now pivot our business model slightly to reflect the new world. Resilience again was a key piece, and then the final point is sort of curiosity. So again, the sort of really high performing CFOs had that curiosity within their nature to sort of go and ask questions and sort of question the data, engage with senior stakeholders around the business, and ask sales guys why the numbers were down, or look at margins and sort of where things could be sort of grown in terms of analysis. So that was the other sort of key theme that we saw.
That I find that steadiness piece really interesting, given what you said earlier about the pace within within P-backed businesses. Like what's the definition of steadiness in that instance? Because that almost implies a slowing down, doesn't it? An evenness of pace versus a speed.
Yeah, sorry, I suppose to give a bit more context on that. So the steadiness refers to sort of, measuring one's response to pace and ability to maintain the status quo. So if you are exactly, moving super quickly at a private equity pace, the steadiness almost reflects that ability to continue that in a downturn, or reflect slightly different if things go the other way.
No, absolutely, and that's really interesting in terms of the common traits, because I guess if you fall within those categories and in how you rate, then you're more likely to have success at that in that environment. So, on the flip side, we talked a lot about what PE companies are looking for when they're working, looking for CFOs. What's the sort of the pros and cons that when you're speaking to people that haven't worked within that environment before, what are some of the things that you talk to them almost to set expectations around what a role's going to involve, and how it's different to I guess life outside of PE?
Yeah, so look, I think obviously the natural contrast is PLC world. And I was listening to one of your other podcasts with Dominique from Purple Bricks, and she gave quite an interesting description of how that business has changed since going private, and sort of probably the differences culturally. I think the main things we see are that extra level of scrutiny on reporting from a PLC perspective, having to be in that sort of quarterly reporting mindset and continuously going to market and having to defend your share price and focus on increasing share price. If things are going great and the business is growing continuously, then that's a fine world to be in. But actually, if sales do drop and you have to then go out every quarter, and the increased level of scrutiny and pressure within that public market, I imagine is very challenging. Private equity brings its own challenges, and that level of scrutiny is definitely still there, but it's more closed off from the investors, and you're able to keep problems sort of in-house. So I think there's that sort of public facing piece, which is quite different. I think, again, coming back to Dominique's point, actually, she felt that perhaps the customer was getting a better service now in the private world, because actually they were able to sort of focus on the end quality of the product, and not continuously sort of going out to market with the sort of company spiel. The other difference, again, typically is that pace and level of bureaucracy. So this is obviously from a site, can be reflected from a size and scale perspective. But typically in a PLC environment, you have various different remuneration committees, excos, level of sort of senior management. And I think people can often find that it takes a long time to get decisions actioned and things sort of signed off and implemented. That level of sort of chain of command, I guess, in a PE-backed business is probably smaller, and they like a bit more of that can-do attitude of, here's the problem I've identified, this is the solution, this is how I'm going to go and implement it. Are you on board with doing that? From a sort of presenting to investors or to CEO. So that is typically sort of what they like to see. So it feels like, from my experience, decisions get made a lot quicker, and the CFOs that I work with do reflect that. I think private equity used to have a really sort of negative stereotype to somewhat extent in the marketplace, of that it was really sort of cutthroat, and investors just wanted to sort of come in and sort of cut headcount and reduce costs to maximize EBITDA growth. But actually now in today's market, it is much more of a partnership. It's really focused on growing a business and partnering with the management team to increase revenues, expand internationally into different markets, etc. So I think that mentality and perception has changed. But we still do discuss that with candidates who are looking to sort of make that move into PE. So I think one stat that does often scare people off is that your average private equity CFO lasts sort of 2.5 years in their role. Coming back to an earlier point around your average hold time of a business PE backed is 3 to 5 years. That means that most CFOs aren't lasting the full investment cycle and are changed out. So when we're working with candidates, we'll always advise them to do as much due diligence on the asset, on the private equity house. Check that there is that chemistry there between them and the investors. Come back to another point I've made around leveraging sort of sector expertise. Do they really understand the business and the growth journey that they're looking to go on? Situationally, is it a right fit for them? For example, if we're looking at a buy and build strategy where there's a business is going to grow via M&A and they need to be heavily corporate finance focused, it's a basic thing, but does that CFO has extensive experience leading acquisitions from due diligence to integration? So that comes down to sort of our jobs as a recruitment partner in terms of sort of matching, profiling and assessing. But we will also discuss those points with the sort of candidates for the sort of CFO positions to check that they know exactly what they're sort of signing themselves up for.
And is it common that are there different stages of there are different stages of an investment? Is it common for a CFO to be in place and then purposely switch a CFO out for like more towards the buyout versus earlier on in its sort of growth and development cycle? Is that a pattern that you've seen, or are they actually looking for somebody to take it all the way through?
So in an ideal world, every investor would like someone who can be there on day one of the investment cycle and take it through to exit. That's best case scenario. You definitely do get people who are better at different stages of an investment cycle. So initially, if you think about that first 12 months of a PE cycle, it's like I say, making sure your house is in order, that there's good financial systems in place, there's scalable processes, the reporting, the KPIs, etc., are all sort of up to PE standards. So there's a bit of that initial sort of transformation sort of piece around sort of getting things up to the required standard. Beyond that 12 months, it can be more growth focused. There could be more M&A, etc. The final 12 months of that cycle, as you've alluded to there, is sort of exit readiness. So we have seen candidates, being brought in and do 3 years in a sort of PE CFO cycle, and then be swapped out sort of 1 to 2 years before an exit. Sometimes people just become available on the market that have got more exit experience. Coming back to our points earlier around those who might not have led an exit, it can be a case of just wanting a bit more of a tried and tested individual, particularly if it's a super valuable asset and it's going to deliver an exceptional return for the investor. PE investors by nature are going to be risk averse. So if there is a more experienced individual out there on the market, that can be the case. But it's not always the case. Again, coming back to my point around sort of partnering, investors do like working with CFOs and management teams and taking them through the whole journey. So it's really situational, which I appreciate makes it sound like I'm sitting on the fence a bit. But it can be a case of both.
And I guess it's figuring out what stage of the PE cycle you enjoy as well, because I can imagine that the skill set that's required for that exit CFO is quite different to those that are doing the transformation piece.
Yeah, very much so. And again, the exit piece is much as you'd expect. It's corporate finance driven. That comes back to my piece around being a deals person, storytelling, bringing people on the journey. Whereas the transformational piece is much more operational, in the weeds, doing the doing and improving and leading that sort of charge, which is a different skill set. So your best CFOs will be able to sort of do both. But some people do excel more at the operational versus the commercial piece of a CFO role, as you'd expect. And there's also a size and scale piece to take into consideration as well, Hannah. If many CFOs are strong in that primary buyout domain, so it might be taking something from sub 20 million revenue, sub 5 million EBITDA to 50 million revenue, 10 million EBITDA. That's their sweet spot. So they might do that journey, exit that business, realize their own sort of value creation equity wise from that sale, and then go and do that similar journey again, but in the same size business and move on. It's a different skill set taking something from 50 million revenue to 200 million from a growth and complexity and sort of financing piece. So you do find, again, CFOs better at different scales of business and different situations and strategies as well.
And you talked because we talked about different stages of the investment cycle, and then you also mentioned earlier about different almost strategies for getting to that buyout, so buy and build, etc. So what are the kind of types of strategies that you might see in private equity, and how would that change the skill set of the CFO that you need?
Yeah, so look, M&A is always sort of something that PE investors tend to look at. I think in today's market, the price of debt has obviously increased a lot over the last 12 months with the wider macroeconomic outlook. M&A is typically sort of funded by debt. So actually, investors and PE investors are having to look at different ways to deliver the same historic returns that they have. And a lot of that, speaking to investors, is going to come from operational improvements. It's automation, it's increasing sales, it's increasing margins. So they're all sort of key things to look at. I think, like I say, that the buy and build piece, in terms of a high volume of acquisitions, is a different skill set. So you look at sectors like healthcare, which has been ripe for private equity investment. It's fragmented. It's multiple individual sort of sites. There are, like I say, continuous sort of M&A. That's quite a different skill set, having to constantly be looking at evaluating deals, prices, sitting around the negotiation table, leading discussions, due diligence through to integration. A real high volume of M&A is very different to just looking at maybe one or two bolt-ons in a sort of investment cycle. So we find that, again, it's sort of situational. People want high volume M&A to execute on a buy and build. Investors, private equity houses themselves might be more involved in just supporting a CFO if they don't have that M&A capability from just if it's a one or two bolt-on acquisitions during an investment cycle. And then there's just like I say, the growth equity piece, which is again sort of more of a minority standpoint and just sort of focusing on, we've got product market fit, we've got good traction here. How do we now take it from X and Y? And that might be, we're looking to go from UK and crack the US. It might be investing in C-suite build out, so not just hiring a CFO, but bringing in a chief marketing officer, head of sales, a CTO if it's a tech product. So really sort of developing that C-suite and management team to be able to supercharge a business in terms of sort of organic growth as well. That's another sort of key strategy. Also, we're increasingly seeing something worth noting is the corporate carve out piece as well. So actually, a non-core business unit, which might be a bit unloved and underinvested in, sat in a FTSE 100 business that actually private equity see a real demand or see a real interest in, because again, with the right management team in place, there could be some quite quick wins to supercharge the growth and invest in scaling that business. So that's again the public to private pieces and corporate carve out. We've seen increased sort of deal volumes in, and I think will be again a key strategy where PE look at that market and think we can pick up an asset on the cheap, but make some strong operational improvements and deliver some good outcomes from a returns perspective in that type of world.
And you mentioned earlier that, sector experience is really valuable, understanding the business model and how that operates. Like, in your experience, what is more valuable when you're going for a role, the sector experience or the working within that private equity background? Like, have you noticed a pattern and a preference? Does it just depend on the candidate? What have you seen?
Yeah, it's really again case by case. There are certain funds that we work with who will only work with candidates who've been in private equity backed businesses before. That's their sort of desire to have someone who sort of experienced that world, as we've touched upon. But increasingly, there is not an infinite pool of private equity CFOs out there, and they're only becoming available every 3 to 5 years on exit, typically, etc. So people are increasingly looking at leveraging that sector expertise. So if you're thinking about it from a SaaS business, for example, do you understand recurring revenue models, the KPIs around your CAC, LTV, churn, etc.? Do you know what the economic drivers are going to be to taking a business from X to Y? If you can demonstrate the traits of what private equity look for, coming back to the pace and the growth perspective in an interview, and leverage and know the mechanics of a business and its sort of business model, we are seeing people make that move more and more, leveraging their sector experience. So again, it's really situational, but increasingly, the sector expertise is becoming more and more important. And particularly within certain industries. So if you think about financial services, where it's heavily regulated, they need people who come from that sector and understand the FCA regulation piece. So in that instance, private equity experience might be less important for them. Similarly, healthcare, regulated space, multi-site, the PE piece might be less important for them. So we do see different sort of nuances within sort of certain sectors as well, where the industry knowledge or an understanding of the business model is more important than others.
And I guess in terms of when people are going out for jobs, are these jobs very often public? Are they in the public domain? Is a lot of the recruitment, is it more shoulder tapping and headhunting? What's the current sort of way that you find candidates these days?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of proactive networking. We do a lot of mapping in terms of sort of finding out which businesses are attracting investment and going out and proactively engaging with that talent, be it FD, CFO, who are already in PE-backed businesses. Our company's been around for approaching sort of 15 years now. So there is obviously a core database of people that we've sort of worked with over the years who might have done 2 or 3 assignments for us now. Having been with the business for 7 years, there's people that I placed a while ago who, as finance controllers, who are the CFOs of today and who we've sort of grown up alongside. So there's that talent pool to tap into. We do advertise. We on sort of our website, on sort of LinkedIn as well. We are quite pro advertising from a search perspective and visibility wise, to sort of make sure that the right jobs are hopefully getting in front of the right people. But it does come back to the age old thing of actually we go and do a lot of proactive headhunting, networking, referencing, going and speaking with investors, chairmen, CEOs, who have they worked with historically that they'd recommend to us. So going out and sort of mapping and engaging that type of talent pool as well.
And from we've talked a lot about sort of the PE firm's perspective on life, but how important is when you're going through that interview cycle is the relationship with the wider management team and the CFO? Are MDs and the rest of the exec team often involved in the selection cycle? How does it normally work?
Yeah, very much so. So naturally, the day-to-day relationship between the CFO and the CEO is going to be key. So yeah, it would almost ring alarm bells to me if the MD or CEO wasn't involved in the recruitment process. And I think that candidates, my advice would be, again, ask why. If you're not meeting the CEO or the MD of the business, you need to be partnering with that individual day to day. So that relationship is key. Touching upon again what we discussed sort of at the start of this, actually, it can be different process wise depending on the minority versus sort of majority piece. So I'm retained on one search at the minute where it's a majority buyout. The private equity house themselves are doing the first round of interviews. So they are meeting and vetting our shortlist of 6 candidates, and they are then introducing individuals to the CEO, to the wider management team, the HR, sales team, execs, etc., to do more of that, still technical, but also cultural sort of interviews. Can I work with this person? Do we get on? You're going to spend more time with that individual than perhaps your own family or partners, etc., working in the office. So that relationship is key.
So I guess talking about that, what does a typical recruitment process look like for a CFO role in private equity? What are the different stages that you would typically see?
Yeah, so it really again does vary based on investor and sort of level of detail around the search, but um, we're quite often seeing sort of 4 to 5 stage interview processes from sort of inception through to sort of completion. So naturally, lots of competency based interviewing. So meeting the investors, meeting the CEO, meeting other C-suite members, be that co-founders or COOs, CTOs, etc. The relationship with the chairman or chairwoman is going to be key as well. So I would expect them to be actively involved in the interview process if the business has one of those sort of people in situ. And we would often advise as a sort of final round to do some sort of case study or presentation. So typically that might be here's an investment memorandum. What are your thoughts? What changes would you make? Or here's a historic budget. How would you what are your thoughts? What changes did you make? And actually getting people to present. So coming back to that piece again around storytelling and ability to hold a boardroom, and often, that would be presented to the investors as well as sort of wider C-suite. So looking at that ability to engage both financial and non-financial stakeholders. So investors by nature are numbers people, so they are going to speak a CFO's lingo, but actually your CTO or CEO might be less savvy on the numbers. So how do you sort of break down detailed analysis, but keep those individuals engaged and keep it sort of clear and concise? Because again, that's a key part of the sort of skill set. I was going to say that presentation piece is very useful. It does often highlight, or bring out a different sort of strengths rather than just sitting and having sort of conversational chats through experience. Again, that is a real key way for people to decide whether the candidate can be right for them.
And then you sent through to me like your recent survey on salaries and what's happened. So, what were some of the key observations that you guys found in terms of salary structure and salary levels? What are some of the key patterns and trends that are happening at the moment?
Yeah, so every year we run a sort of annual remuneration survey across our UK CFO practice. So I think we had over sort of 500-600 responses this year from people working in the sort of mid-market private equity domain. So your average UK private equity CFO is on sort of 193,000. And the equity range that we saw sort of ranged typically between sort of 1.2 to 1.9%. So there are lots of different ways to break this down, and it's quite a detailed report that reflects sort of geographical sort of salaries, benchmarking, sectors, etc. But they're the sort of high level sort of strap lines to it, I guess. So at that 1.2% sort of equity range, typically that was in sort of businesses of sort of 500 million plus enterprise value. And at that 1.9% range, it was sort of sub 20 million sort of enterprise value. So it reflects that sort of risk reward of and sort of size and scale of business coming into something earlier. You're typically going to want sort of a bigger piece of the pie. Versus obviously something more mature, there might often be less of the equity pot to sort of give out to sort of CFOs. It was the sharpest increase we'd seen in the sort of 6 years that we'd run the survey in terms of that base salary increase. So on average, base salaries increased 8% last year, which interestingly again reflects probably what we're seeing the wider macro piece, inflationary pressures, and that basic salary number being sort of more important to sort of incoming CFOs, CFO candidates. And interestingly, your average sort of female CFO in the PE space was earning just under sort of 220,000 per annum from a basic salary perspective, versus their male counterparts 189,000, which ultimately reflects sort of a supply and demand issue. So I think statistically, it's circa 12% of sort of CFO positions in the UK are held by female candidates. Obviously, with that sort of private equity as well as PLCs sort of desire to increase diversity across the board. We have seen increased demand for sort of female candidates, as well as different ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds as well. So that was just some interesting other takeaway points that we saw.
No, really interesting. And if anyone wants to get hold of the survey, what's the best place to find it and get access to it?
Yeah, so you can request a copy via our website, which is www.finatal.com, or I can share my sort of contact details, and people can feel free to reach out directly to me, and I'm happy to share that as well.
Brilliant. And I will pop a link if we can grab that from you, Jamie, and put it in the show notes as well. So if anyone wants to go directly to
yes, 100%, that'd be great.
Yeah, and download, that's no issue. And I guess last and maybe final question, we'll see what comes out of it, because this has been a really great conversation. But if you're looking to make that step into private equity, what are some of the best networks you can get involved in to get that experience, or at least those contacts to try and find the right role for you?
So look, I think it is about sort of reaching out and sort of engaging with specialist sort of headhunters in that domain, who can give you advice on the sort of types of sort of skills that you would need to make that transition and that market piece. Increasingly, obviously, in today's world, there are heaps of sort of forums on LinkedIn about sort of future CFO networks, etc., and sort of programs that you can sort of enlist on to network with peers at similar sort of levels of career, etc., around advice on how to sort of break into that world. I think that sometimes it can be proactively as well, going out and trying to sort of identify funds that invest in a similar space to where your skill set aligns, and sort of actually actively engaging with the funds directly as well. So there's lots of different ways, and like I say, that I'm more than happy to sort of share my sort of hopefully pearls of wisdom on the best way to do that.
No, and just to say, Jamie, it's been a fascinating insight into the world of PE CFO recruitment. So thank you so much for coming along and sharing your knowledge. And as you mentioned earlier, if anyone wants to reach out to Jamie, I will pop the link to his LinkedIn profile in the show notes, to give you guys a chance to reach out. And Jamie, any sort of final thoughts or top tips for anyone looking to get into the exciting world of CFOs in PE?
I think so I think it's sort of self-reflecting on sort of what gaps that you have in terms of making that transition to private equity CFO, and actually, yeah, how do you go about getting that in your current role? I think, like I say, like it's networking with sort of forums online, specialist sort of search firms. The market is generally sort of really picked up. We are intrinsically linked into sort of deal flow and activity from a buyout perspective, but generally there's a lot of confidence in the market. CFOs are moving. There should be more exits this year from the conversations we're having with PE investors, which again creates sort of opportunity in the market. So yeah, look, we're hoping for a positive year. So yeah, I think that's it in summary.
Now, and it's exciting to hear that the feeling is positive within the market, because I think there's always the challenge with the current economic climate is making sure that there's plenty to be getting on within that space. So thank you so much, Jamie. And again, if you have enjoyed this episode, to all of my listeners, I'm sure you will. But if there are questions or follow-ups that you would like me to ask on a future session, if you have any feedback, or if you've enjoyed it and you've got value from it, please do leave us a review. Reviews help spread the word about the podcast and help me understand whether we're doing a good job here. So thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners for staying with us, and we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.